President Obama and Russia's Vladimir Putin talk at each other from the UN podium and to each other on the sidelines. Plus an exclusive interview with the man trying to be the next Speaker of the House. This is Special Report. Good evening. Welcome to Washington. I'm Bret Baier. The two most powerful political leaders in the world went one-on-one late this afternoon at the United Nations. The meeting came after dueling speeches before the General Assembly at the UN, revealing the vast differences in how the two men would deal with the brutal Syrian civil war and ISIS terrorists. We have Fox team coverage tonight, Brit Hume, on what we can learn about President Obama from his statements today. But we begin with correspondent Kevin Corke at the UN tonight and the big meeting. Good evening, Kevin.
Good evening to you, Brett. As you pointed out, first time in a long time, in fact, nearly a year, since the two men have met face-to-face, Presidents Putin and Obama. But it was interesting in the hours leading up to their private gathering, they aired their differences in a very public forum.
We must recognize that there cannot be, after so much bloodshed, so much carnage, a return to the pre-war status quo.
We think it is an enormous mistake to refuse to cooperate with the Syrian government and its armed forces, violently fighting terrorism face to face.
But what's not in dispute is the devastating effect the war in Syria is having on the region and its people, millions of whom have been swept up in one of the greatest humanitarian crises in modern history.
Nowhere is our commitment to international order more tested than in Syria.
What to do about Syria? Just one of several areas of disagreement between the White House and Kremlin, which have set back bilateral relations to near Cold War depths, including Russia's unlawful incursion into Ukraine and Crimea. Also, there are serious concerns about Moscow's stated role of fighting ISIS in Syria. And most notably, the U.S. remains strongly opposed to the Kremlin's support of the regime of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. Putin said today the Kremlin would continue to bolster Assad, arguing that to do otherwise would lead to a devastating power vacuum. And in an interview with CBS 60 Minutes, he upped the rhetoric with this.
Russia will not participate in any troop operations in the territory of Syria or in any other states. Well, at least we don't plan on it right now.
The White House's relationship with Russia is complicated. While the Russians did partner with the U.S. on the Iran nuclear deal, the Kremlin has strengthened ties with Tehran, including intelligence sharing in the fight against ISIS. And Putin met with Iran's president before he met with Mr. Obama.
We must not forget that the roots of today's wars, destruction and terror.
In his comments before the UN, you saw Rouhani take shots as expected at the U.S., saying that U.S. policy is really what has led to the great instability in Syria. And so concerned is the Obama administration with the growing influence of both Iran and Russia in the region that, as you have heard here on Special Report, the administration set aside some $500 million to train Syrian fighters to take the battle to ISIS. $40 million of that has already been spent, but for that $40 million, we have seen fewer than a dozen war-ready fighters actually hit the battlefield. And I should also point out, while obviously the president will not meet with his Iranian counterpart tomorrow, he is expected to meet with Raul Castro, the leader of Cuba. Castro also very forceful, Brett, in his comments against U.S. policies today, although the meeting tomorrow is expected to be far more congenial.
Kevin Corke, live outside the United Nations. Kevin, thank you. The meeting between Presidents Obama and Putin comes at a time of high tension and low cooperation between the Cold War adversaries. And it says a lot about how President Obama thinks about foreign policy. Senior political analyst Brit Hume is here with some thoughts on that. Good evening, Brit.
Hi, Brett. President Obama's speech at the UN today encapsulated perfectly notions that have long driven his foreign policy, ideas to which he clings in the face of events that seem flatly to contradict them. He looks upon the behavior of America's adversaries not simply as self-interested or even evil, but mainly outdated, old-fashioned. Sure, Russia's invaded Ukraine and is now backing the butcher Assad in Syria, and yes, China may be stirring up trouble in international waters and hacking America's computers. But the president warns Americans against, quote, a notion of strength that is defined by opposition to old enemies, perceived adversaries, a rising China or resurgent Russia, a revolutionary Iran or an Islam that is incompatible with peace, end quote. Well, those may sound like the very threats we face. But Mr. Obama further warns against, quote, the idea that The only strength that matters for the United States is bellicose words and shows of military force, unquote. Never mind Mr. Obama's own bellicose words in announcing that Assad had to go and later in threatening to bomb Syria over its chemical weapons. Mr. Obama never followed through. Things have gone disastrously since, and now Russia's Putin has sent in troops to support Assad, and President Obama is looking for ways to cooperate against ISIS. Does it even occur to him that the problem is not bellicose words and shows of force, but following them up by backing down? Brett?
Brett, 6.5 years in, this speech today, are we closer to knowing exactly what the Obama doctrine is?
Well, I think we know what it isn't. American foreign policy used to be basically rooted in the idea that you practice diplomacy backed up by the threat of force, which implied an occasional willingness to use it. This president has such an aversion to use of American military force that I think his idea of a defeat would not be the mess we see in Syria as much as if American troops had gotten involved there. That, to him, is the definition of failure.
All right, Britt, thank you.
You bet.
Senators are right now voting on a so-called clean bill to keep the government running past the end of the month. The vote is still open right now, but the measure does have enough support to pass. Last week, an effort to fund the government and defund Planned Parenthood was quashed. Outgoing House Speaker John Boehner has said the House will take up the bill. He also says the Planned Parenthood effort is the kind of thing some of his conservative GOP opponents insist on pursuing.
The Bible says beware of false prophets. And there are people out there, spreading noise about how much can get done.
Boehner announced last week he will resign from Congress at the end of October. The battle to replace Speaker Boehner and ascend to arguably the third most important office in the land is already underway. The betting favorite in the minds of many here in Washington and on Capitol Hill is current House Majority Leader Kevin McCarthy, who made his intentions official this afternoon. Kevin McCarthy is a 5-term congressman from California, born and raised in Bakersfield, about 100 miles north of Los Angeles, far away from the glitz of Hollywood, where farms and oil fields stretch for miles in the southern San Joaquin Valley. The son of a firefighter, McCarthy won the lottery at 18.
So I bought 2 tickets and I won the lottery. True story. $5,000 is the most money you can win. But if you put yourself back in 1984, you're 18 years old, you just won $5,000, and you're 10 minutes away from Tijuana, where would you end up, right? In Congress, no.
McCarthy invested that money, opened a deli, and then he eventually sold it to put himself through college. He married his high school sweetheart, Judy, and together they have 2 children. His rise in politics was swift. In 2002, he was elected to serve in California's State Assembly.
Kevin McCarthy is a wonderkind. When he was in the California legislature for 4 years, he actually became minority leader as a freshman. That's pretty remarkable, and it tells you that he has some organizational skills and is able to get along with a wide variety of people.
After his 4 years in the state legislature, his old boss, Congressman Bill Thomas, decided to retire. So McCarthy ran for his job and won. McCarthy rose quickly in the ranks. In 2010, he co-authored a book called Young Guns, A New Generation of Conservative Leaders, with Eric Cantor and Paul Ryan. A year later, he was voted in as House Majority Whip. In 2014, after conservatives rose up to deliver House Majority Leader Eric Cantor a stunning loss in the primary election, McCarthy became the first Californian and at age 49, the youngest person ever to become House Majority Leader.
And we'll turn this country around.
The great advantage he has over Speaker Boehner is the lack of scar tissue. In a sense, his being in the House only 9 years is a plus.
The absence of leadership over the past 6 years has had horrific consequences all across the globe, and it's only getting worse.
The Republican caucus in the House has made it pretty clear that they want a more aggressive posture toward the president. There's no question at all. He is much less likely to negotiate with the Obama White House. Any hopes he might have had about getting some kind of grand bargain on the budget or anything else with a Speaker Boehner, probably that's disappeared. With this caucus, you never bet on anything for sure, but he is certainly very likely the next Speaker of the House.
House Majority Leader Kevin McCarthy joins me now in studio. Thank you, sir, for being here.
Thanks for having me.
You are officially running for Speaker as of this afternoon. So, as Speaker, what would you do differently than John Boehner?
Well, as Speaker, the Speaker sets the culture. And the culture in Washington has to change. You know, we've been governing by crisis. And there's too many people in Washington who care about power institutions and don't care about making a difference in the lives of the average American. Look, it's not going to be easy to change this culture, and it won't happen overnight, but that's my mission.
You heard the soundbite from Speaker Boehner this weekend on the Sunday show saying that he described some conservatives in the House Republican caucus as false prophets. Is he right?
Look, I believe in Reagan's 11th commandment. I believe we are a team. I believe everybody has a right to be part of the team. I'm not the manager, I'm the team captain, so we're all a part of it, and everybody has an opportunity to help change. We just have to come together and work in the same direction. We're going to start that tomorrow night with a conference, so laying out our agenda.
How did Speaker Boehner fail?
Well, my job isn't to understand what Boehner did right or Boehner did wrong. He's a decent man. He fought and won 2 majorities for Republicans. He's passed a lot of great legislation. He felt there was a time to depart. But it's a time to change the culture. You know, I'm sensitive to what I'm hearing outside the Beltway. I want us to be closer to who we represent. I want the people to begin to feel again that this is their government, that they are in charge and that we serve them.
Here's how the Washington Post wrote it up today. Chris Cillizza. It's virtually certain that McCarthy or anyone else who succeeds Boehner will eventually find him or herself caught between the so-called establishment and Tea Party wings of the Republican Party. He goes on to reference Heritage Action, which came out. Today's announcement when Boehner said he was going to step down is a sign that the voice of the American people is breaking through in Washington, they said in the statement. Now it's time for a principled conservative leader to emerge. Simpler, we got Boehner's scalp and we're going to hang it up on the wall as a warning to the rest of you. So if you win, I guess is the question, how do you avoid becoming exactly what John Boehner was, which was eventually pushed out by his right flank?
You change the culture, you bring people together, you set an agenda that drives people. And that agenda has got to change the lives of everyday American. The other thing that's quite different that I see from the perspective is we got to unite. We're in some of the worst times we've ever been in. We see the challenges around the world. We see the challenges economically. We need to stop governing by crisis and start solving problems. We need to fight, but we need to fight to win.
Okay, we just announced that the Senate is moving forward with this clean continuing resolution that is going to fund Planned Parenthood, at least for the short term. We asked people on Twitter to write in, and one of them, GeoBeast1, writes in, how far will he go to defund Planned Parenthood?
Well, you know what? They should not be getting taxpayers' money. You're going to see an enrollment correction, but more importantly, you're going to see a select committee. When people in this country ask why Hillary's numbers have dropped, because people don't trust her, why don't they trust her? Because what the select committee in Benghazi found out she was doing. What if we're able to have a select committee in Planned Parenthood and America is able to find out what Planned Parenthood has been doing? Let's fight, but let's make sure we pick the fights to win.
So Speaker Boehner has already signaled that he's going to bring up this clean CR, even if it requires Democratic votes, and push that through. There are other things that are very controversial in the conservative caucus. The debt ceiling increase, transportation bill, the Ex-Im Bank, which you voted against. Hot button issues. If he brings all of that up in October, is that a problem for you?
Well, it could be a problem for the country, but what you want to do, I don't think a highway bill being brought up is a problem. I think that's finding a solution, because you know what? We could put a Republican solution to that where we get tax reform as well. That's a big coalition. And a debt ceiling. What if we're able to get something that changes the direction, that brings the debt down? Because in our own budget, that will go in balance in 10 years, you had to approve the debt ceiling a few more times. Ex-Im, that has failed now, and it should stay failed. I fought hard for that, and I'll continue to fight. Government should not have to be funding it. Government should become effective, efficient, and accountable. That's the culture and the mission I'm fighting for.
If you push through what you want to push through, you still obviously have to deal with a Republican Senate where there is a Democratic bloc to a lot of it. And it's going to be that same frustration that likely a lot of things will fail in the Senate because of the votes there. And you don't have a Republican president. So how do you fight the continual spin of frustration that some of those rank-and-file conservatives will obviously feel.
You know, there's going to become a generational change.